It is March 2nd, 1933, and in a shore house in Spring Lake, New Jersey, a man of 96 is writing a letter to his local newspaper. His name is Robert Cheeseborough, and he wants his neighbors to know exactly why he has lasted this long. He eats, he tells the Spring Lake Gazette, more than a teaspoonful of petroleum jelly every day. He credits it with all 96 years. The substance he is describing is almost certainly in your bathroom right now. But 74 years earlier, it was garbage. Black refuse that fouled the pumps on America's first oil wells, scraped off the drilling rods by hand and thrown in the mud, until a lamp oil chemist, whose own trade was dying, filled a bucket with it. He spent 10 years turning that garbage into a medicine, yet he would never manage to own it. So how does a waste product nobody wanted become the most trusted thing in the medicine cabinet? And why is half of what everyone repeats about that letter not actually in it? This is New American Fortunes, where almost none of them ended the way they began. If you like this kind of story, subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel. In the 1850s, Robert Cheeseborough was a young chemist in Brooklyn in the business of light. He refined oil into something that would burn cleanly in a lamp and sold it out of Red Hook under the name Luxor Oil. Accounts differ on what he was refining. Most say sperm whale oil. The best trade history says coal, but it hardly matters. Both were about to become worthless. In 1859, at Titusville, Pennsylvania, Edwin Drake drilled the first commercially successful oil well in the United States. Petroleum came out of the ground cheaper than anything Cheeseborough could distill, in quantities no whale could match. He was 22 years old, and the industry he had built his life on had about a decade left to live. Most men in that position go looking for another trade. Instead, he went to look at the thing that was ruining him. What he found in the Pennsylvania oil fields was mud, dimber derricks, and pumps that kept seizing up on a substance the drillers called rod wax. It was black and viscous, and it clung to the drilling rods as they came out of the well. It had to be scraped off by hand and thrown away. It had no value to anyone. But Cheeseborough watched what the men did with it first. They worked it into their own cuts and burns, because somewhere along the line they had noticed that wounds treated with it healed faster. Nobody had thought it worth writing down. So he filled a container with the wax that was destroying his industry, carried it back to Brooklyn, and spent the next 10 years on it. In 1860, he tried to patent a way of purifying petroleum through bone black, a charcoal made from bone, but it did not yet give him what he was after. Rod wax is filthy. To sell it as a medicine, he had to turn a black tar into something clean enough for a doctor to put on an open wound. He got there in 1869. In 1870, the machinery went into the Red Hook factory. In 1871, it went on sale. Then, on June 4, 1872, the United States granted him a patent for it. That document is still readable and gloriously flat for the founding text of one of the most recognized products on Earth. He describes his invention as, quote, a new and useful product from petroleum, which I have named Vaseline. And he describes what it is made from with no romance at all. The residuum of petroleum left in the still after the greater part has been distilled off. The leftovers. He patented the leftovers. Where the name came from is less certain. One version builds it from the German word for water and the Greek for oil. Another has him filling his wife's vases and bolting a medical ending onto the word vase. That second story comes from a magazine article written in 1953. Hold on to that date because it comes back. But by 1871, he had a finished product, a factory, and almost no customers. Druggists would not stock an unknown grease made from oil field waste. And how do you create demand for something nobody has a word for? Cheeseborough did something that had essentially not been done before. He gave it away. He loaded a horse and wagon with thousands of 1-ounce sample bottles, drove into upper New York State, and handed one to every person he passed.
And his last call in every town was the local druggist, who by then had people asking for a product he did not carry. By 1873, more than 500,000 samples had gone out. The story most often told is that he also burned his own skin in front of crowds, spread the jelly over the wound, and held up his older scars as proof. But the record for that is thin. Treat it as the legend it may be. What is not legend is what happened next. In 1873, Colgate agreed to carry Vaseline across the country. The following year, he incorporated the Chesebro Manufacturing Company with $500,000 of capital. Then came the medals, and then, in 1876, The Lancet, the most respected medical journal in the English-speaking world, endorsed it. The oil field garbage was now a medicine. Almost every retelling adds that Queen Victoria knighted him for it in 1883, but he does not appear in that year's honors list, and no record of the ceremony has ever been produced. But here is the part that should have made him one of the richest men in America, and did not. His patent covered the process. It did not cover the product. Anyone who worked out how to purify petroleum residue could sell petroleum jelly, and the words petroleum jelly were merely descriptive. Descriptive terms cannot be trademarked. So the imitators came. St. Joseph's Laboratories sold Moraline petroleum jelly out of New York and Memphis. It was not alone. In 1878, Chesebro registered trademark number 6041 for a single word, Vaseline. Yet that word was the only thing he could ever fence off. He had invented a substance and was left owning nothing but the name on the jar. And then the oil business came back for him. In 1881, the Standard Oil Trust bought majority control of the Chesebro Manufacturing Company. It suited them both. Standard Oil had a use for a byproduct, and Chesebro had guaranteed supply. Set that against where he started. The petroleum boom had destroyed his first business. Now the monopoly that boom created owned his second. He stayed inside the trust for 30 years until 1911, when the Supreme Court broke Standard Oil apart and set his company loose again. But free also meant without a supplier. By 1920, the company had stopped making Vaseline altogether and had to buy oil and gas companies of its own to keep the jars filled.
Chesebro had retired as president in 1908 and spent his last years at the shore. Which brings us back to that letter. On March 2, 1933, he told the Spring Lake Gazette he ate more than a teaspoon of Vaseline daily, and that this was why he had lived so long. That letter is real. Researchers found it in the newspaper archives. The other half of the story is not. The version everyone repeats has him curing himself of pleurisy by ordering a nurse to coat him head to foot in petroleum jelly. But that detail traces to a single magazine article from 1953, which cited nothing at all. The same article gave us the horse and wagon story and one of the two explanations of the name. So how much of what everyone knows about Vaseline is actually documented? A surprising amount of it runs back to one writer working 80 years after the fact. What we can document is this. Robert Chesebro died on September 8, 1933, 6 months after that letter, at 96 years old. His company merged with Pond's in 1955, and Unilever absorbed it in 1987. The jar sells in more than 100 countries today. So picture him one last time at that desk in Spring Lake, 96 years old, explaining to a small-town newspaper that the secret to a long life is eating the stuff they used to scrape off drilling rods and throw in the mud. He was probably wrong about the teaspoon, but he was never wrong about the garbage. What is the household product you would defend the way Chesebro defended his? Tell us in the comments the brand and the thing you use it for that it was never meant to do.